Welcome to TERF Talk Down Under. I'm Stassja and this is Ange.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Stas.
Hi, well, what a week. Good
Oh,
for TERFs everywhere around the world, including in Australia. Swimming is back in the hands of women.
thank fuck. I mean, thank goodness.
Yep, yep. Really good news. Kath Deves was on Sky News, talked about it, did an excellent job. Rowena Edge, also from Save Women's Sports Australasia, was on the BBC talking about it, and she also did a really excellent job. And what's fantastic is that International Rugby League and World Athletics are following suit. It's like this one little card has been taken out and the whole house of cards is starting to crumble.
But the Australian media, you'd think, honestly, like they are just painting it as if it's the most horrendous thing, that it's killing trans people. You know, they're even putting links to Lifeline in articles that very, fairly just describe these sporting bodies making these decisions, and it's underneath is the, if you are feeling vulnerable, call Lifeline. I mean, what the hell? They don't put those disclaimers when, women have to read about assault and abuse and all the horrible things that happen to women.
Despite, especially the age has just gone fucking full woke.
No, they're mental. Even the good journalists are like now fully can't even say a word.
But if you look at the comments on the Facebook posts by the Age, or if you go to their actual website and read the comments, no one is buying this shit. Stop pushing it, you idiots.
Yep. I've been on these comment sections for years, and when I first used to make comments, people would come in and call me names and stuff like that, and there'd be no one supporting me. There'd be like two trans activists yelling at me and no one supporting me. Now I'll make a comment, and I'm not talking about anything offensive, just say, look, it's really nice that women's privacy and dignity have been respected, or something like that. And I have no negative comments and a sea of positive comments, and I'm almost uncomfortable with it because it's so unusual. It's like everyone in the country is woken up, and I think part of that is this whole, everybody wants a piece of the pride, everyone wants a piece of the LGBT flag, everyone wants a piece of all that, but it's always all about the T, and everyone is sick to freaking death of it. T, non-binary, T, and that's it.
Yeah, people are really sick of it. They've had a gutful. The worst article I saw was the one featuring, I think her first name's Ada Chung, the activist endocrinologist who's profiting from transgenderism.
Yeah.
The article headline was FINA ruling based on opinion, not science, Australian researchers say. And oh my God, the laugh reacts on that post on Facebook were in the lead, because that's how fucking stupid you guys sound. Stop doing it.
And they keep dragging that woman out who works at a gender clinic. She's an endocrinologist, and they have her on all the ABC programs. They quote her in all of the media as the scientist and the researcher, this one woman. And yet all of the people that we know of in all sorts of medical professions, in psychology, in psychiatry, heads of children's hospitals who've spoken out with concern about the whole trans thing, nobody talks to them. Nobody.
And World Rugby, they never mentioned the World Rugby report, which proved it, as if you need proof. Is your eyes not enough?
Yeah, and it's always, and if there is proof, it's it's about body size. They're all like, oh, it's so unfair because trans women have the same bodies as normal women once they've taken testosterone for a day. There's these crazy lies, and yet, they're not even thinking about the other impacts that men in women's sports have on women. And, I've been getting a bit of criticism. Why do you keep going on about all the other stuff, Angela? It's the other stuff that impacts me. I don't want men in my private spaces. I don't want men in my change rooms. I don't care who they are. And nobody will talk about that in the media, because once they open the floodgate to talk about the other impacts of men in women's sport apart from bodies and fairness, then they know they've got no argument, because women are going to put their hands up and go, well, excuse me, I don't want a person with a penis in my change room. And that's why they don't let us talk. They don't let us speak. It's so frustrating.
You see,
and seeing a big hulking swimmer or a big hulking fucking rugby player and them saying, oh, it's so unfair, you know, and they interview them on the TV. Hello, Callum. And they interview them on the TV and the dudes look like He-Man and they're there complaining that they can't play against women and girls. It's insane.
I was just going to say, fucking 60 Minutes on their Facebook page, they ran a clip of Hannah Mounsey, who is obviously built like a brick shithouse, talking about how he's lost all of his male competitive advantage.
Yeah,
I'm still talking. And this trans woman doctor backing him up and saying, yeah, trans women lose all of their muscle strength. And it's just blatantly untrue. These are lies.
Yep.
No one in the comments was buying it.
Good. I'm glad people are speaking up, because Twitter's still a cesspit where, you know, the sort of, you know, extremists on Twitter and all of the blue ticks and all of the Australian media that has a presence on Twitter is pro-trans. And they do that, you know, it's not up for debate, because they won't engage with us at all. And I'm going, excuse me, you know, working domestic violence, had men come into our women only meetings. What are you going to do about it? And they're all like, nah, don't want to know. And it makes me livid.
It's really pathetic. The Australian media just needs to catch up on this, and hopefully whoever's reading the comments on their social media can see that this is really deeply unpopular. But look, all of that said, despite the media response, this is a win. This is a big win for TERF around the world.
And particularly for people like Kath Deves, who did try and, you know, who did step up when it was dangerous to do so. And she was unable to defend herself and her position at the time. And I hope that she feels vindicated, because she suffered a lot personally because of all the bullshit and lies that were published about her. And I hope, you know, that she can clearly see that she was on the right track, because, yeah, she's got so much support out there. You wouldn't think so looking on social media or in the media, but she has so much support, you know, from all walks, people from all walks of life. So, yeah, good on you, Kath, if you're watching, good on you.
Yeah, well done. Yeah,
and all the other women, you know, at Save Women's Sports, you know, they've really, you know, what they do has been fantastic, and they really do have to weather a lot of shit.
Yeah. Look, there has been, Clarissa Bai is an excellent journalist on these issues. She's doing a really good job. Just today, first ever article that I know of in Australian media about men in women's prisons in New South Wales.
Really? Because I haven't looked at the media yet today. I've had a busy day. Really? Oh, I can't wait to read that. Good for her.
I'm quoted.
You were quoted. You were quoted the other day too. You're getting around. It's great.
Well, that was Clarissa again. She did an article on drag queen story time. I think she did an excellent job. But the other thing that happened this week was Cambridge Road Play and Learn Centre, which is a childcare centre just outside of Hobart. They had a drag queen in to read stories to the kids, and a little action group formed and put out a press release through the group Keep Gender Ideology Out of Schools, calling on, you know, the Tasmanian government to step in and do something. Is taxpayers' money going towards this? Are these guys working with children checks? Because we know that overseas, some of these drag queens that have read stories to children have been found to be child predators, child sexual abusers. So
drag's adult entertainment. We all know that. Anyone who's ever been to a drag show knows it's adult entertainment. It's not suitable for children. in any way. And it's, you know, it's giving them not just in the content, but also that it's a, you know, it's a real parody and a satire of women. That children don't need to look at women in that way, or to think that a man can just put on a costume and be a woman. Yeah, because even drag queens get a female pronouns now and get called she. You don't even have to be trans. You can just be a parody part-time.
Yeah. I can't remember what I was going to say.
No, I do that all the time.
But the other big story this week, the Greens. The Greens have done a Donald Trump. And, they really have. So they've sacked Linda. I always forget if it's Gale or Bale. Linda Gale.
Gale, yeah.
They've sacked her as the convener of the Victorian Greens. Very undemocratic. People are completely outraged. A new organisation has formed, I think, led by, or at least Bronwyn Winter, who's been on our show, is doing a lot of work on that. It's called Australian Feminists for Women's Rights.
Yeah.
They got a write-up in the Australian, which was excellent. You know, something I noticed, so Linda Gale, won that position with 54% of the vote. So it was very close. And it just made me think back to when Binary Australia did the poll on women's sports, and it was 55% of Greens were against males in women's sport. So I'm just having a guess that roughly 55% of Greens Party members are not on board with any of this gender identity woke shit.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I had a discussion with someone who I'm very close to, and we generally tend to avoid the trans topic because I get shitty. And he was saying, oh, you know, I think some people, you know, some young people are genuinely trans, and, you know, that they should have medication at 16 and, you know, make decisions as adults about how much further they go and all this stuff. And I'm going, don't agree with you, but we were sort of trying to flesh it out. And he said to me what every single normal, be nice person said to me. And he said, I support trans people, but I certainly don't think they should be in women's sports or in women's change rooms, or, you know, children should transition and no child should have surgery, but I 100% support trans people. And I'm there, oh, shit. You know, I said, well, that's me. And that makes you a TERF.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh my God. And that's what most people think. So they're seeing all these articles and stuff, and they're superficially throwing support behind trans ideology. But once they find out what's actually going on, and, you know, this person I was talking to quoted the Australian story where Dr. Telfer lied on television and said that children were not having surgery in this country. Minors were not having surgery. Now, I contacted the ABC and said that I knew a child that had a double mastectomy a month after her 15th birthday, and that she'd not been gender non-conforming as a child, but at 12 years old, they just decided she was trans, and by 15 had a double mastectomy, on hormones as well. Now, I contacted the ABC at the time, and they completely ignored me.
I put in an official complaint about that. Yeah.
And there were other things that she said that were absolutely just lies. And this person, because like most people, you know, they're like, oh, I don't know much about this trans stuff. I will watch the public broadcaster, taxpayer-funded ABC, because I trust them to tell the truth. And I will believe the bullshit that they tell me.
Yeah. You know what the response was to my official complaint was that it was true that no children under the gender clinic was not giving double mastectomies to underage girls. What they were doing was giving referrals for those girls. So like that's the ABC's defense. Like they're just hopeless. And we saw that again with the you know, the Kath Deves coverage and the lies that they were repeating.
and that they refused to apologise to Kath and to, you know, Samantha Maiden, for example, who misquoted her all over the internet and painted her as a really horrible person based on, you know, snippets of Twitter feeds and snippets of videos. Yeah. Never apologised, never publicly acknowledged that they had lied, that they had deceived and they had misrepresented Kath. Nobody did.
SBS did.
Oh, did they? That's one. Yeah, actually, I wrote about that too. Yeah. Speaking of writing, while we're talking about writing things, I did write to Surfing Australia. Was it Surfing Western Australia? About you know, men not participating in women's surfing, because as we know, there was a male surfer who won the longboarding championship in 2019 and came back this year as a female, apparently. Not a female, but a pretend female, to win the women's championship, and he won. So yeah, there's they were looking for members of the public to write submissions that they will take to their board, and I wrote to them, and they thanked me for sending a rather colourful email with some very plain language that many people may have found offensive. It wasn't intended to be that offensive, yeah, but they thanked me for it. So if more people could write to we'll put a link, you know, we'll put an email link in the comments, but if more people could write about men and women's surfing, that'd be great.
Excellent. I had an interesting conversation with a friend recently as well. I hadn't spoken to her in some time, but she knew that I was onto this transgender shite. And in our conversation, I explained to her all about autogynephilia. Like she already got it that, you know, men don't belong in women's sports. But when I described autogynephilia, she's like, oh, okay, that makes so much more sense. Yeah, I can totally see it. Thank you so much for explaining that to me. I had no idea. So I think autogynephilia is a good peaking tool, everybody.
Mm.
Now, our guest has arrived.
Excellent.
I'm going to bring her in. This week we have the wonderful Helen Daintree joining us from Queensland.
Yay!
So Queensland is, it's looking like self-ID is going to be introduced very soon. And so there's a bit of sort of what they're calling consultation going on with the general public.
Oh.
Hi, Helen, how are you going?
Good, I'm just getting sorted.
There you are.
There we go. Yep.
So you participated in a session last week with Queensland government people.
Yes.
About self-ID. Tell us about it. How did it go?
Well, I'll just start by saying there was a group of 10 feminist women who had written to the Attorney General and requested a meeting with the Attorney General, which was declined. Then out of the blue, an invitation to an information session came from the Attorney General's Department to IWD Meanjin and to Fair Go for
Queensland Women,
Steph Hughes, who each of those, just those two organisations could have 2 representatives at this information session. Okay. So we were adamant that and clear that this was not a consultation. They were going to give us information. It started in could only be described as an unfriendly atmosphere. We sat and waited for about 5 minutes in silence while Narissa tried to get into the meeting. And that proved unsuccessful. Steph managed to connect her in via her phone sitting near the computer so she could hear what was going on.
Yeah.
Then there was about 40 minutes of the various bureaucrats in the room reading the various proposed clauses and admin details of the reforms to the birth certificate legislation. We didn't receive any prior written material. So we worked frantically to take notes during the meeting. And that became increasingly difficult with the length and the volume of material, information that was being presented. We did our best and we compared notes and wrote up, everyone, the four of us, after the meeting about what was actually said about the proposed proposed reforms to the Act. It was uncomfortable. You know when there's a hostile vibe in the room, yeah. And there was. It was not at all friendly. So
can I just clarify? So this was a special session just for essentially gender critical women?
Yes. Yes. It was just the four of us.
Yeah.
With I think 4 bureaucrats, including the Deputy Director of the Attorney General's Department there.
Right.
And you weren't allowed a chance to respond at all or ask questions?
Yeah, at the end there was about 10 minutes where we were asked if we had any questions. We had talked beforehand and we did ask a number of questions. And I can go through it. If you'd like, I can run through an overview of what was actually said. Yes, we did have some questions and they didn't get even close to being satisfactory answers. But in very general terms, there were a couple of times when they said things like, the Queensland government wants to keep sex and gender separate. And we're thinking, oh, good, this is good. And then would immediately contradict it with a statement that there will only be gender on the birth certificate form. So when they said that, I thought, oh, they've listened to other jurisdictions in the UK. Then maybe they're going to have sex as a box and gender identity as a box on the form. No, that's not how it was going. So yes, it was difficult because of the volume of material and justifications they were presenting for the reforms. That in the end, I'd say, in summary, it is probably the most extreme, I'd use the word extreme, but probably the most compatible with gender identity ideology in both its content and its language of any of the legislation so far in Australia.
Jeez.
Terrifying.
So it was quite distressing to go through it in some ways, because you're raging inside when people are saying just ridiculous things. I know Steph was concerned because at one point, and I think it was the statement, you'll be able to change your gender identity as many times as you want in your life, as long as it's not more than once in 12 months. And I heard Narissa on the phone say, that's insane. So, yes, it was.
Oh, it sounds.
It was emotionally quite difficult. For myself, I was surprised. About the demands of having to sort of sit there and listen, have this stuff thrown at you, without giving too many non-verbals on screen that you thought this is absolute rubbish.
And not being able to respond as well.
No. So it was not a consultation at all.
What did they call the session?
A high level information session on the current thinking.
Current thinking.
So they're
So
just lecturing.
that was encouraging that it's current thinking. So we're at it's not about to be introduced in this immediate, I would say, even this year, unless they work really hard, but other political events may overtake that.
Did they ever disclose how it came to pass that this is trying to become legislation? Like who were the lobbyists that brought this? No, because I know then we could follow the financial trail.
No, they didn't disclose that, but there was a petition by a teenager in Queensland in 21 asking for it, this change. And then the Greens took it up. The Greens had a public meeting about it, and then Amnesty International had a public meeting about it last year. Before the Labor Party actually came out, before the Attorney General actually made a statement. So that the lobbying and the pressure was being done by non-Labor actors, as it turns out.
Fascinating. Now, so did they give an indication of when this will be introduced?
No, we did ask for what next and timeline. So this is just, they are still deciding what the draft legislation will be. The draft legislation may or may not be put out for public consultation. It will then go to a committee stage, because in Queensland we don't have two houses. We don't have a house of review. We just have one house.
Yeah.
Instead of a sort of a Senate, a house of review, we have a committee system. Takes that place. And the committees usually will ask for submissions, and they're the ones who look at submissions once the proposed legislation becomes public. So everything we heard was the current thinking, not the draft, although they went through the admin clauses and the legal entities and all of that, that information about a new act or a revision of an act. So we're a long way from it being presented and voted on in Parliament.
Do you think it will be this year?
The Attorney General promised that it would be this year, but as I said, it's hard to say, and some of our insiders in the party say that it's not yet on the agenda for the immediate sittings. So it's some way away, and really now's the time for input, although our experience with the conversion therapy consultations up here was not encouraging. As you probably know, there were, I think, 142 submissions to the committee on the conversion therapy. Only 5 supported it. Those against were the Law Society of Queensland, the AMA, who fortunately are also speaking out about the Tasmanian one.
That's the Australian Medical Association.
Yes, yeah. So those two really senior professional people spoke against the Queensland legislation, conversion therapy legislation. But it went through virtually a couple of minor changes so that psychologists weren't criminalised for not using gender affirming care. There were a couple of minor changes. And compared to what came later in Victoria, our legislation is quite mild because it only applies to health professionals and not to teachers or parents like the Victorian one does.
Right, yeah.
So, but the process was the same then. There was a public information session, which a number of us, Anna and I think Steph may have even come down for the public information session given by bureaucrats. And then the various stages we went through, and then there was another submission that we made to the committee itself once the legislation had been drafted and publicised. But the time frame, don't know. Need more information from some insiders in the party before we know.
The thing with self-ID, you know, trans-identifying people, you know, they can turn up wherever they want anyway, and most people are too scared to say anything about it. But what happens through self-ID is they're emboldened to go into more places where they're not welcome, because they say, well, my birth certificate says I'm a woman.
Yep.
And who wants to challenge that in court? Who has enough money to challenge that in court? So that's where the birth certificate makes a difference, because people go, oh, well, they can do what they want anyway, because they can. But the birth certificate is the thing that makes people shiver and shake in fear, because they don't want to be dragged through the legal process.
Yeah. And it's worth remembering that self-ID has basically been in place since 2013 for all federal documents. So Medicare cards, Centrelink, and even passports, F or X. So, and at 2013, when that Sex Discrimination Act was changed, all states were encouraged to change their forms so that they were consistent with that federal legislation. So self-ID has pretty much been in place, except for the really critical legal document of birth certificates. And it's in schools and sport where birth certificates are often requested. So the clauses that they're suggesting for children in Queensland are a bit troubling. They're more troubling than other things, because children do get to use their birth certificate, and schools do get to rely on that birth certificate. So what happens at the moment, what happens if a single-sex girls' school refuses to enroll a boy child who says he feels like he's a girl? If they have a birth, that boy child now has a birth certificate, I think that school will be compelled. They will have no discretion. They will be compelled to enroll that boy child.
It's such a mess. And you know, when you look at situations like that with schools and prisons in particular, it is just so obvious that this should never have been allowed. No one should be able to change their legal sex except for maybe people with disorders of sexual development, and the doctors got it wrong. That's how I feel about it. It's just it's just mess upon mess upon mess caused by this stuff.
Yes, well, we did ask a question. We asked several questions. How was this going? Well, Steph asked the very good question. Had there been any risk assessment of the unintended harms that could come from this legislative change? And there was a stony silence in answer to that question. So the answer is no. And when pushed about prisons and DV services, they simply said it'll be up to those services to decide what to do.
No.
Now, we know once you have this legal document, there is no room for them to decide what to do, because once it is a legal sex, they can be challenged under the law for discrimination. But that was the smoke screen that kept throwing at us. They've just passed it off to other departments to sort out. They are not going to consider the impact for those situations.
Which is exactly what they've done with the sports thing. Say, oh, it's up to the individual sporting bodies to make it.
And we know girls' participation is dropping in sports, and there's an increase of sexual assaults in schools. So those two things, you know, and they're just throwing more boys into these things.
And And with that single-sex schools, as you say, in co-ed schools, we know that sexual assault is really high. So parents, a lot of parents are opting for a single-sex school for two reasons: the safety of their daughters, and that the evidence shows that girls perform better, have more high self-esteem and more self-confidence if they have been in a single-sex school. And certainly I can remember when I was teaching at uni, it was really easy in tutorials to see which women, young, well, they were young, in Queensland, some of them were probably still 17. But anyway, it was easy to tell by the way that young women participated which ones had been into single-sex school and were confident to express an opinion and did not defer and stop talking when a male spoke.
Yeah, yeah.
It was quite striking, really.
Now, Helen, you've been at this for a long time. How did you come to realise that there were issues with transgenderism and women's rights and lesbian rights?
Oh, well, it goes way back. And it comes to lesbian rights. I guess it started in the late 70s when I was taken to court over the custody of my then 1-year-old girl child. At that time, to be same-sex attracted was to be classed as mentally ill and therefore ineligible to care for your child.
You make me cry. Yeah.
So my daughter's father applied for custody on the grounds of my mental psychological unfitness, because at the time the medical experts said that all same-sex attracted women were mentally ill. It was the classification in the DSM. So I became aware of it very early. And it's partly why I'm still passionate and fighting about the change in the meaning of sexual orientation and same-sex attracted to same-gender attracted.
Yeah.
Because that then strips lesbians of their rights to identify themselves as same-sex and only wanting relationships with other women. And Queensland changed that meaning in that conversion therapy law. They changed their legal definition as part of the change. It slipped through, didn't slip past us, but now it makes the word lesbian and sexual orientation absolutely meaningless. There is, because our human rights only exist because of the laws to describe them and implement them. Once you change those laws, you're changing the rights, and we've lost ours because of, well, the conversion therapy changing that meaning in Queensland, and now this coming one, which is simply, I think, to reinforce that conversion therapy law stuff.
So you've lost your rights legislatively and socially, because there aren't any lesbians anymore. They're queer. So they're the same as the men who are queer and the trans people and the whoever's who are queer. So there's no,
a lot of the time I'm an LGBTIQA plus person. That is used as the descriptor, even though a lot of the time the G is irrelevant. The gay men are irrelevant to the topic. I'm still, and I'm not.
No.
And I have no way to object, say, hang on, no, not me. You're not speaking for me.
Did any of the same-sex, same-gender attraction stuff come up in the meeting with the bureaucrats last week?
No. Oh, sorry. Yes, it did. Yeah. It did, in terms of the changes to the form itself. The form itself was really disturbing. So we were disappointed. It's going to now only refer to gender, because as we were told, the word gender is best practice on birth certificates. No evidence, of course, but we were just told that gender was best practice. And I think it's Victoria used sex on their form, and one other, I've forgotten, either the Northern Territory or South of Tasmania uses gender, not sex, but the Northern Territory uses sex. So they haven't actually got even that across the nation. The language hasn't shifted, but because we're the last, we've got the full brunt of gender identity language being incorporated into these reforms. So ours is gender. And the word mother.
Sorry, when you say form, that's like the
certificate itself.
Yep.
Yeah. Where so it would say mother, father. It's no longer going. It's unlikely to say that. It's going to say birthing parent.
No way.
Which is only one step better than gestational parent.
The public doesn't know this because we don't know this, and we're the first on the scene.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's outrageous.
Yeah.
So this is when we're starting, our heads are exploding and we're unable to speak and say, how about, what if, blah, blah, nothing. We had to sit on it. So yes, the form will, they think, it's proposed, I've got to be clear, birthing parent and then parent. And they stated that these changes have come about because there was a trans-identified female who went to the Queensland Court of Administrative Tribunal to get themselves listed as the father of the child on their birth certificate. So this working group on the reforms have decided there will be birthing parent and parent. And then they came in, well, this will make it easier for same-sex couples. So they did refer, but again, that coattailing of same-sex issues on treating them the same as trans issues happened again, of course, not surprising.
This is outrageous. I've got a good journalist who sometimes writes for the Brisbane Times, I think it is.
Brisbane Times. We've got the Courier Mail up here.
Courier Mail, sorry. Yeah. I'm going to put you in touch. You've got to get this.
Okay.
You've got to get this out before.
Now's the time, really. Now's the time because it's still being discussed. Although I get a bit pessimistic because there's so much in place federally from the Sex Discrimination Act, and people can already self-ID on a whole range of forms. It's hard to. We had hoped that there might be some sort of exceptions or some alternatives, because the main argument now is that this is a core identity document. But in fact, birth certificates have two functions. They are also a legal historical record of your birth.
Yeah.
And that function of birth certificates is being totally dumped in favour of another form of ID, which Medicare cards are, and our driver's licenses have no sex or gender designation on them. That we just have a photo and our name and our birthday. So that's a bit less useful, but for people whose appearance matches their gender identity, that does as ID. So adults don't need to produce their ID very often, and there are other forms around. So dumping historical and revising history on a birth certificate is very, very tricky.
I think of genealogists in 100 years' time. They're going to be completely lost. I'm surprised there isn't outrage from the genealogists on all of this.
They don't know.
There'll be no more programs like Where Do You Come From? It won't be possible. And there's been no thought given to children because it seems as though the parents might be able to leave. Well, it seems as though at the moment it's going to be an opt-in category. So you can leave it, that thing that says gender, you can leave it completely blank.
For your children.
For yourself.
Oh.
And possibly your children. It was very confusing. That information just got so muddled that it was hard to follow what they were saying. But South Australia's birth certificates are also opt-in. You can leave it blank. And what was interesting, the numbers ran like something like, I think, 27 people from September to May 2019 to 2020. I think it was 27 men, trans-identified males opted to put male. I think 17 or 14 trans-identified females opted to put male, but 738 people opted to put nothing.
Wow. That's the non-binaries.
Yeah, they've opted for nothing.
I don't understand how you can change your birth certificate every year, hypothetically.
Yeah.
And yet they also force children to decide what gender they identify with and medicalize them to permanently put them in the opposite sex. So the hypocrisy and if these people are smart enough to write legislation and to debate it and all that stuff, why are they not getting it?
Well, yes, the contradiction is glaring in the reforms here because there's two pathways for adults to get their certificate. There's no medical process at all. They've got rid of any diagnostic system and gone purely to an administrative system, a proclamation. The only difference is whether you were born in Queensland or you were born elsewhere. That's the different pathway. And then there's a different pathway for children, depending on your age. And one of the things that bothered me was that now an adult is defined as 16.
Oh.
So, and in this reform, adults will be 16. So 16-year-olds will be able to just self-ID without anyone else knowing necessarily. They won't need any parental consent. For 12 to 16-year-olds, if the parents consent, they can simply apply with self-declaration.
Yep.
So bad.
However, if parents, and for under 12s with parental consent, the child must also have been seen by, I've forgotten the exact words. It's a really new health professional. So let me have a look here in my notes.
Base professional.
It'll be someone from the gender clinic.
It's a child development informed practitioner.
Oh God.
But anyone from the gender clinic, anyone.
Yes, exactly. And they must provide a written assessment stating that the child, this is the under 12s, understands the implications of registration with a new gender marker. Now, if there's problems with the parent, one parent, it can go to the court, and the court will decide what's in the best interest of the child. And we know how those decisions run.
This is
because of all the supporting legislation around gender identity now that we have in conversion therapy, all that really constrains the court to say what's in the best interest of the child. Like in Victoria, you must affirm the child. So a court in Victoria must allow the child to change their birth details.
Oh God, this is all so sinister and makes me so angry.
Something else that's sinister, was there any mention of how this legislation affects criminals, men who are in male prisons and decide to get a female birth certificate to enhance their chance of being moved to a female prison, or a female get out of prison, rehab or whatever, halfway house?
No. And I personally would like to see a clause that says any male person convicted of a crime will be unable to change their birth details until they've finished their sentence.
Yeah.
That would simplify some of that.
Yeah.
But I suspect we didn't, as I said, there was no real discussion. It was information given to us, and that's all right. We're pleased to have it so early. Yeah, but no, the implications for women in various situations, single sex spaces, are not being considered and not considered relevant.
It's going to lead to increased sexual harassment, sexual assault, and potentially rape, possibly even murder. That's what these laws do.
And they're told that even, without that, I nearly got kicked out of a group that I was a foundation member of because of my views on sex and gender. So the intimidation and the harassment, it does take a toll. It really does.
Yeah, it does. And the other thing is that what this has done for me is that the state, meaning the word for all governments, the state is enforcing a belief on the whole population. Yeah. And if you don't subscribe to it, there are legal consequences, because now that belief is thoroughly embedded in the laws of our country. And to not believe and to act outside the belief that humans can change their sex means legal consequences. You end up in court because the state has enforced a belief in the absence of evidence. But we're now legislating in the absence. There's no evidence-based legislation in this area from what my experience has been in Queensland.
Well, it's going to be interesting when Sal Grover goes to court, because this is the first case of its kind where gender identity and sex are going to be discussed at length.
Yes, yes.
Look, thank you so much for filling us in on all of that, Helen. Really appreciate it.
Helen, I could sit and listen to you talk, and and I love a chat, but I could actually sit and listen to you talk for hours. I really could. You have got such great stories to tell, and it's such a great way of speaking. It's just, such an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Helen. We'll have to wrap it up there. But okay, keep us posted.
Yeah.
I'll put you.
Thank you.
Journo. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I just have one other thing to say is one of the things that's helped me make sense of this is revisiting the idea that we live in a post-truth society. And that just means where, not that people are telling barefaced lies like Trump, but the fact that feelings and emotions are considered more important than facts and evidence. And the concept of there being facts and evidence as reliable is being dismissed in favour of feelings and emotions. Yeah. And this reform of the birth certificate, to me, is just a classic example of an element of our post-truth society. Yeah, you don't need to tell barefaced lies.
Yeah. There's a word, hyper-realism, And it was the guy that came up with that word, he lived in Soviet Russia when Soviet Russia was obviously collapsing, but no one was allowed to talk about the fact that it was collapsing. And he said, and people were scared to talk to one another about what was happening in their day-to-day lives. So yeah, I see a bit of, I see similarities with this stuff, you know. Yeah.
Trump perfected it, and so did the trans rights activists.
Yeah. All right, many thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Helen.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. That button. All right. Oh, mate, wait until everyone finds out about birthing parents on freaking birth certificates.
Yeah.
They're going to go off.
They're going to go off.
I'm going to.
No, they should.
I'm going to do my best to get this out. Oh,
I'm looking forward to, you know, that's actually, I tweeted something about ACON Stonewall and tagged Kit Kowalski in it and whatever. And I was really surprised to go back an hour later and see hundreds of people had liked the post, and people were contacting me and going, wow, thank you for explaining. I knew there must have been a reason. So now they can see the financial ties. Okay. And I knew that, like autogynephiles, that's one of those wake up, you know, light bulb moments for people where they go, well, you know, well, that's why all the media and the governments, everyone's got a, you know, got some sort of financial benefit out of it. They get it because they don't know. They honestly, they sort of say, well, you know, yeah, no, it's social justice, it's equality, it's that stuff. But there's something in the back of their minds that goes, nah, something's not right. And that goes a long way to explaining it.
It's a complete perversion, and I use that word very specifically, a perversion of the concept of equality. This whole trans stuff, it is a perversion of equality.
Yeah, I don't know, I've lost, you know, only predators stand in front of you and tell you that what your eyes see and your senses tell you isn't happening.
There's a very famous tweet that went around for a while there. It was along the lines of transgenderism is like kicking women in the shins and then telling them that they have no shins when they come home. That's such a good summary. The ACON stuff, Kit Kowalski has just launched the ACON Exposed website.
Oh, it's good.
I'm going to put a link for that in the comments. Go and check it out, especially if you're a journalist. Let's expose it properly. So that's exciting.
Wow, this self-ID is just insane.
Queensland could be the big showdown we've been hoping for.
But I think until people are able to come up and tell people how it feels when there is a man in your women's space, you know, until people who are directly impacted by this get a voice, people aren't going to care, because the people who are loudest in the pro-trans stuff, they're the ones with the luxury beliefs. They're not the ones that are going to be in prison. They're not going to be the ones at the domestic violence or homelessness shelter. So they're not impacted by it. But the people who are impacted have no voice. And until we hear their stories, and the media is deliberately denying them, we're hearing the melodramas of the trans people and all this bigotry that they can't name from sources that they can't name, apart from TERFs, but we hear nothing of the women directly impacted. Now, I would love to sit down with someone and tell them exactly how I felt when there was a man in a women-only service when I was there with a rape victim, and how, as she recounted her story, I watched his face. I would love to talk in detail about how that felt.
It's just disgusting.
It's disgusting. It was disgusting. And people have said, you know, trans activists say to me, oh, she's so angry. Oh, she's so enraged. Well, if you'd been there that day, you'd have steam coming out your ears. And in hindsight, I wish I'd just approached him. I wish I'd kicked him out. But that was the first time I'd had, you know, I'd had men in my space before, but in that context, I was so shocked And I was so shocked that nobody else was saying anything. And I don't want to always be the bad guy. So, I have so much regret about how I handled that, because if it happened tomorrow, I'd say, get the fuck out of here. This is a women's space. This is a recovery space, and get out. And if you don't, I'll fucking drag you out. Excuse the swearing, but I'm really angry. But, that's how I would react to that now. But at the time I did what everyone else does and just went, oh. And that woman never came back. She never came back. And her face haunts me. And the look on his face as she recounted her rape story, it haunts me. And that's why I'm angry. I'm so goddamn angry of being gaslit and being told constantly that what I see and what I feel and what all the women around me feel and see when these men are in our spaces, that isn't real, and it doesn't matter. And no matter what kind of monster he is, that he's a woman the same as us, I'm not having it. I am not having it. And I'd go to friggin' jail. I would.
Can I ask, what was the look on his face? Was he getting off on it?
Well, I wouldn't say he was getting off on it. I would say that he was uncomfortable, but also almost smug. Like, he was awkward because he, and when it was his chance to speak, because people were going around the room talking about things, he spoke about sport.
What a fuckwit.
And that triggered me because it was such a male response. And all the women were talking, all the women, not all the women, because a lot of women didn't. But normally in those circumstances, women bring up their own trauma. That's what these groups are about. They're peer support, got facilitators and their peer support. And these women talk about their trauma and how they coped with the experiences that happened to them, to give some hope to the person who's just had that experience. And that goes with domestic violence, sexual assault, alcohol, drugs, prison, all of those things. They work where women share their stories to help other women. So when it was his turn to say something, after this woman has said this thing where everyone in the room was horrified, she'd been assaulted by a stranger in the city at night, right? Everyone in the room was horrified and she was shaken like a leaf. And he sat there and talked about sport. And that, it couldn't have been any more obvious that he should never have been there.
Outrageous. Yep, these people, they're just into crossing boundaries. It's constant boundary transgression.
Yep. And any man who wants to, like, there was trans-identifying blokes who would dream of going in a space like that.
Yeah.
And good, when I do generalize and say, trans identifying men, but I know quite a few who would never dream of entering into women's spaces or women's change rooms and things like that. But too many of them do. Too many of them want to go in there, and they want to make us uncomfortable.
Yep. Speaking of uncomfortable, we're going to have to wrap it up, but we'll finish on this lighter note.
Oh yeah.
Ben Fordham leaked this, exposed this story this week about the Opera House. Now, everyone in the world practically knows the Opera House up in Sydney, and they have, gender-neutral toilets. They still have men's and women's, but they have this unisex one, and it is set up so that women walking into the toilets walk past men at the urinals, which is just uncomfortable for everyone, including the men. And their whole response to the thing was, we actually had covers over the urinals, and one of the patrons must have taken the covers off the urinals. It's like, what is the point in having the urinals in there in the first place if you're just going to cover them up and make them not usable? It is so dumb.
People can see through it. They can just go, what? And, it's like, I feel sorry for some guy going, I'm going to the toilet, got his thing out. And women and kids walk in, most men would be horrified. But then there's always those few, probably the person that took the covers off that went,
I'm going to get my dick out and with women in the room.
Yeah.
All right.
That's funny. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone, for watching.
Yeah.
Please like, share, subscribe.
Yeah, please do subscribe. It really helps us.
And we'll see you again next week. Bye.
You will. See yous.